So we're going to kick off the first seminar of the day. So with further ado, I'm going to introduce you to Peter McCombie, who is a master of wine. And he achieved his MW in 1994. Yep. And he's a well-known, aside from being a very well-known speaker in the circuit, he's a consultant to several on-trade venues, including Jamie Oliver's 15, Dorchester, Cinnamon Club, RAC, etc. The far left, Nicolas Clerc, who achieved his Master Sommelier in 2010, and I think it's a great asset to our panel, since he looks after the wine collection at Le Pont de la Tour, as well as many others in the group. And to my right, Shaikh from Columbo Group, who studied history in University of London to start with, and he was responsible for putting together a very famous nightclub called Fabric, and now looks after the Columbo Group, who has pubs, fine dining venues, and nightclubs. So it's quite versatile. So with further ado, I'll leave you with Peter McCombie.
Great, good morning. Thanks, Junior. I've been asked to just briefly talk this morning. I'll give you a little bit of background, a bit of context. Here's a view of the current stage of the on-trade from the Wine and Spirit Trade Association's Q3 report for 2013. It's based on figures provided by CGA, who are the industry analysts who are very good at what they do. What they said was, despite the hot weather, total alcohol volume in the on-trade decreased by -5% in the quarter and 6% over the last 12 weeks before the report. Nevertheless, there are positive trends. I'm not going to run through them all, but what I'm going to do, I'm going to more or less stick with the ones I think are relevant to us today in wine. Champagne remains the best performer in wine over the long term. However, growth has reduced and sparkling wine remains stable. Still wine volume turned to growth over both time periods, driven by the performance of red wine, up from -1% to +7% over the quarter. Rosé and white wine have declined over both time periods, which I have to say seems a little bit strange since we're talking about the spring and summer. In terms of countries, France overtook Argentina as the strongest performing country, up +6% to 10% annual growth. It also retains its place as the top volume contributor to total wine and experienced the largest growth over both periods. That's the quarter and the year. Growth slowed for Argentina. Italian wines continue to improve, and the Spanish enjoyed growth over the year as well. Australia, New Zealand, Chile, USA, and Germany all declined in volume over both time periods, which is interesting. Looking at it from another way, something like 22% of men drink wine compared to 55% of women. Personally, I don't know many men that don't drink wine, but I find that quite interesting. The number of women drinking rosé was up 3%. Younger drinkers, that's 18 to 24, are more likely to drink spirits or RTDs compared with beer and wine and cider. Red wine remains the preferred drink of older drinkers, that's 55 plus. Younger drinkers, it turns out, are more likely to drink at home than any other age group, although there is a degree of seasonality about this. Those drinking at home across all age groups rose, although it didn't necessarily translate into drinking out less. So maybe they're just drinking more. Average monthly spend is going out is about £45 compared to £44 in August 2012 and £41 in May 2013. So we've had a bit of growth. One thing I would say about these figures is that they cover the entire on-trade, and I'm going to guess there's a range of experiences in this room. So they may not necessarily match your own experience. However, I think what they do show, in line with our own imperial experience, is that while certainly things in London are not too bad, I don't think we can afford to be complacent. pricing is important. People are spending more, but that doesn't mean they are not price sensitive, nor indeed does it mean they won't trade up, given the right incentives. These figures also show the youth market is a challenge. Clearly, we need to get young drinkers on board with wine. And as I said, while I don't know many men who don't drink wine, that comparison, 22% versus 55%, I think represents a challenge. What we're going to hear now, I hope, are some suggestions that can help us to meet some of these challenges. Nicolas.
Is it my turn already?
Okay, now I just want to ask Nicolas, who's going to, based on his experience, talk to us about how to optimize sales. And after that, if you guys are taking any notes, you'll be free to ask any questions after Reese speaks, and hopefully we'll have a debate going on. Okay, so Nicolas.
So first of all, many thanks, Junior, to invite me to that panel. One of the questions you highlight to me was how to devise a list to achieve most profitability within that wine list. I note several points that we will be able to discuss between us or between the audience as well. When I'm building a wine list in terms of achieving profitability, the first thing I'm looking at is first of all understanding my restaurant concept, and from there, another point I highlight, competitor analysis for me is something very, very important. It can help me to well, in terms of selling price, to have a look at what will be a minimum or a maximum I can charge. After that, knowing my clientele, his expectation. There is several difference between a clientele coming from Mayfair or Acne. And from there, I'm starting to build a wine list. Classification of the wine and the price of the wine, I will say most of the pricing will be organized from the lower to the higher. I tend to recommend an entry-level price underneath £20. Doesn't mean that is the house wine, but it's a calling price for our clientele, and I think it's an accessibility basically on the list. Speaking about gross profit after that, I will say a good understanding of our top 50 sales. Top 50 wine, we will apply, of course, a higher markup, and after that, a decreasive policy of gross profit is quite important. I found it quite silly to have, let's say, 75% markup on everything, entry-level wine, as much as fine wine. An idea as well in terms of profitability, most of our best-selling wine are available through glass or carafe. Very important thing is to select a good supplier. From that turnover, they will be always happy to help in terms of pricing, discount, or even free stock. In terms of experience and looking after a big list as well at Le Pont de la Tour, I realized that a good proportion of the wine which are sold are between, I will say, selling price £35 to £90, and that's a very important category for us, where we will inject a lot of wine. They can be classics, they can be or coup de cœur or discovery, but that's the category of wine where we will make for sure the most profitability, and they will as well represent the best value for money. And to finish, of course, high-end wine, fine wine, to apply rather than a percentage margin, cash margin is very, very important, I think, if you want, or if the company, your company want to generate some turnover on those wines. That okay for you so far?
Okay. In terms of cash margin, can you just expand that? What if you're looking at a wine that you purchased for 150 to 200 pounds? What sort of cash margin would you expect?
I will say you need to. Well, I'm working for a company, D&D, which always going to have to cover several things on that cash margin. But I will say from 30 to 50 pounds on the top of that, will make a wine extremely affordable on your wine list, and And most of all, I think the aura of your wine list or the aura of your restaurant will reflect on that, and rather than being expensive, you will be affordable.
Okay, good.
Okay?
Now, to carry on, Rhys Shaikh,
Hello.
and he's going to speak about basically how to keep the wine list fresh and interesting.
Hello. This is working. First of all, I'm very honoured to be here amongst such distinguished people. I'm not a master of wine or sommelier. I just love wine. And first of all, I think I come fundamentally from a different approach. It's not working. And that's about accessibility. You know, if we look at restaurant business in the last 2 years, we've seen massive trends. The rise of casual dining. You know, those statistics prove that the kind of people that are drinking wine now are completely different to people that are drinking wine and being sold it by sommeliers and white tablecloths. First and foremost, I think you need to make wine accessible. I think wine, more than any other product, is alienating. I think we, as people in the industry, reinforce that alienation. And I think most importantly, we need to demystify wine. And this is a message I send to my staff every day. Because at the point that someone comes into your restaurant or into your bar or into your pub and they feel awkward, they revert to the one thing they can control, which is price. And that's why they end up ordering house wine. You know, the most powerful tool we have is our staff. Our staff are the fountainhead of selling your wine list. And unless they have those principles of demystifying wine and not using language that would alienate people, then you're always going to find it difficult to upsell or incentivize or do anything. And, you know, I think the concept of upselling for me is an important thing. I don't think upselling is selling someone a more expensive bottle of wine. I think you're upselling an experience. You know, you sell someone a better wine with their food, they have a better experience, they're more likely to come back. So I think first and foremost, you know, to talk about lists, it needs to be accessible according to your product. You know, in my businesses, my product revolves around this accessibility. You know, the way I design my list sets out for people to feel comfortable in reading them. You know, if there are certain obscure grapes or wines there, I make sure that my staff are fully immersed in that wine so they can translate to the customer the passion. Because I think first and foremost, what makes wine wonderful, why we're all here and what we love wine is the stories, is the theatre of wine. And I think that's what needs to be translated on your list, or not in your list, for your staff. And I think that's fundamentally the key to how we move forward in terms of attracting these new markets that you talk about, and making wine more accessible for young people, as it were. How do you achieve that? I think through constant training of your staff, constantly engaging them in the theatre of the wine. You know, I mean, there's some basic things you can do. I've tried something, my wine list at Paradise. I think red wine, for example, is quite familiar. People know grapes. They know Merlot, Pinot Noir. But I think when it comes to white wine, apart from Pinot Grigio, Chardonnay, and Sauvignon Blanc, people struggle outside of those grapes. So I've tried to provide familiarity in the way that I've structured my list. So my list will fundamentally have the main grape variety, so start off with various Chardonnays, and then the next line will be, if you like Chardonnay, try this, and then I'll be able to lead the customer into trying grapes that otherwise are a bit obscure, but having that connection with something they're familiar with, i.e. Chardonnay, makes it more likely for them to move in or try such a grape. Same with Sauvignon Blanc, same with Pinot Grigio. But ultimately, what I'm trying to get at is the most important thing, I think, in terms of how to maximize your wine is your individual approach. You know, I think it needs to be a recognition that the days of selling wine in white tablecloth sommelier formats need to be adapted. You know, and you guys need to make a conscious effort to use different language, to pitch your product differently, and to be committed towards your staff who are going to ultimately be selling your product and your list. Oh, that's all right? Yeah.
Excellent. I hope you enjoyed that. And I'll start with a question first. And if you wish to follow on with the question, feel free. And my question is, and I'll start this question to Peter, is how to devise a wine list that best guides the consumer? Geographically, by taste, by style, by grape variety?
Okay, that's a very good one. It's interesting what Riz said, because I would pretty much agree with everything he said. I think one of the problems we face in the wine business is that people, by definition, because we're here, we probably like wine, and I think it's very easy to get caught up in our love of wine and maybe get a little bit geeky and all that kind of thing. And I think the really important thing is to turn people on to the things that we like. So for me, structuring a wine list is about making it accessible, making people feel that they can understand it. There's nothing worse than looking at a wine list and thinking, I don't recognize any of the wines on this list, because that makes you feel stupid. And as Riz says, if people feel stupid, they revert to the one thing that feels safe, and that's price. So I think you dumb down the list. What's interesting, I've argued this for years, and my wife would say, it's all very well for you to say this, but where's your evidence? I've always believed that you need to do something different. For example, grouping by style. And Gerard Basset, who I think is the only person in the world who's a master sommelier, a master of wine, and has an MBA in wine business. And for his thesis, he actually asked people, he had a survey done in restaurants, and they found a clear majority of people wanted style cues on a wine list. The old geographical model, I think, still works to some extent, certainly if you've got a sommelier to guide you. But I think, personally, when I write a wine list, I'm not expecting to be involved selling the wine, so the list has to sell itself. So I want to make it really easy for people, and I think style is a really good way to start. I find maybe a blend of style and variety can be quite useful. Again, as Riz said, there are a few varieties that people feel comfortable with. They know what Sauvignon is, they know what Pinot Grigio is, so don't hide. I sometimes might have a section of Sauvignon as a list in amongst style cues. So I think for me, that's the perfect way. Style with some varietal information, and obviously a bit of geography along the way.
Just to add to that question, whatever the way the wine list is put together, do you think the descriptions are necessary? Wine descriptions?
Wine descriptions. For years and years, I was really, really anti-wine descriptions. And I came to realize that it's because they're written by winemakers who are mostly full of crap, or wine merchants who, all due respect to Junior, are the same. And my wife said to me one day, I really like descriptions on wine lists, because again, it's about style cues. So I listen to my wife. I'm a modern man. But I now write...
He's a very good chef, by the way.
I now write descriptions on wine lists, and I have two rules. One is that they should be one line. No, you don't have to follow them, but for me that's a discipline. I have to say what I can say about the wine in one line, and I consciously try and sell the wine. So I don't talk about the colour. I don't use words like classic, because what does that mean? If you know what it means, great. If you don't, it's no help to you. I want to turn people on. I try and mix up the style. And the other thing is, I believe maybe if it's a really short list, every wine can have a taste in it. But actually, I think when you get up to 20 or 30 whites, 20 or 30 reds or bigger, I think if you have a note for every wine, it's too much to read. So I have maybe about a third of the wines will have a note, and when we reprint the list, we change the wines to have a note.
Okay. The next question I have is, I'll probably ask Nicolas and Riz to answer the question, because they're coming from different backgrounds, different types of business. But it's a two-part question. First is, what is the ideal size of the list? And the second, what is the perfect split between old and new world? Starting with Nicolas.
Well, ideal size. I don't really think the size is very important. I think what is very important is the dynamism behind the wine list. So the dynamism of the wine team, and most of all the turnover of wine. You can have I don't know, a star Michelin restaurant with 80 wine on the list, but have a real dynamism behind, a massive turnover. I think 1,000 wine is far too much. I will be sad if I had only 20 wine, but I think I can cope with 80 to 100. I think it's a good size as well. And I think the dynamism behind it is very, very important. Split old world, new world, well, it will depend. Depends the business. It will depend the type of restaurant, the type of food as well. So that's a difficult one, actually, very difficult one.
What is the split at Le Pont de la Tour? Roughly.
It will be 70% of old world against 30% of new world.
Ritz, yours?
Obviously, my kind of place is New World because they're a lot more accessible, both in everything that we're talking about and in terms of style. You know, often if you're not buying wine at a certain price point, old wines aren't ready to drink, and I feel that you're ripping off your customer by selling old wines that are quite young. So we try and sell wines that are ready to drink, and in our kind of business, in the restaurant business, often new worlds are a lot more fruit forward at an earlier stage. So from a purely marketing point of view, I sell more new world wines, but I think there's a balance, and that's the important question. In terms of the answer to the size of your list, my list is reflective of staff knowledge. There's no point me having hundreds of wines if my staff only know about 10 of them. It's ridiculous. You know, I'd rather have a list, a smaller list that I feel that all my staff are very knowledgeable about. So you come in there and you ask a member of my staff about a certain wine, they're able to compare in style between 3 or 4 different wines and engage with the customer, because that's what you want from your staff. You want them engaging and talking. We all know when you go into any kind of business, whether it's just for a drink or food, you know, it's the passion of staff and that product knowledge that provides inspiration for you, and whether you come back, it makes you feel good, it makes you feel safe spending money in that place. So my list very much reflects the operational ability of my staff to sell it first and foremost.
Can I stick my oar in there, Junior? Yeah. I admire big lists, but I don't want to write them. And actually, as a customer, I'm not sure I want to see them. If I go out with my wife, I've got some friends, we go out and eat and drink quite a lot. And actually, if we get a big wine list, the boys spend 10 minutes looking at the wine list and the girls are really bored. I think it's quite antisocial. Now, maybe if you have a sommelier can come and cut to the chase. If you've got a short list, I think you can have a quick look at it and maybe make up your mind by yourself. Maybe have a bit of guidance from somebody. But I find it's very easy for a big list to tip over to become a bit of an ego trip. I'm not going to name names, but I know a list that has, or used to have, 20 Merceaux, and I just think it suggests you can't make up your mind. It's not hard to add, you know, there are lots of good Merceaux around. It's not hard to add them to the list, but does that make it a better list? I'm not sure it does. I'd rather that in this case it was a sommelier restaurant, I'd rather they curated it. They said, these are the best 3, say. This one's a village one, this is a premier cru, this one's got a bit of extra age, or something like that. And that, to me, is much more interesting. In terms of the old world, new world split, I think it's absolutely relevant to where you are. I had a client once who, you may guess in the accent, I'm a Kiwi, and I had a client who said, I gave him a new list, and he said, there seem to be rather a lot of New Zealand wines on this list. And I said, listen, I don't get paid to be patriotic. These wines work with this food. And I think I think there's an arbitrary distinction. I would expect Nicolas, being a Frenchman working in a fine dining restaurant, to have more European wines. That makes sense. And I think Riz's point about having, you know, maybe a younger clientele, a less experienced clientele, and having fruit-forward wines, that makes sense. To be honest, I don't actually look at the breakdown of old versus new world. I just want the wines to perform.
Okay. Any further questions? Okay. I'm going to talk about food matching, and the first question is for Nicolas. Should a wine list carry food recommendations? And then back to Riz, because they're, again, different types of businesses.
Oh, it can. I think Oxmoor has a brilliant wine list and do on the wine list a recommendation of specific pieces of beef, and I think it's a great idea actually. I will reverse the question as well, and I will say, does a food menu carry on the wine recommendation? It can help, for example, the sale of sweet wine on the dessert menu. I think it's a good idea as well. I've got no objection to that. I think, as I said, taking again back the example of Oxmoor, I think it's a good idea. So, but again, appropriate to a specific type of restaurant and business.
Yeah, I mean, food and wine matching is key. You know, that what we're selling is an experience, and the experience of eating in a restaurant is enhanced by matching that with a wine. So, yeah, I think, yeah, definitely it can. In answer to your question, I think it should be encouraged. Whether you write that on a list is the operational maintenance of it. You know, and if because our food's quite seasonal and it's changing. If you have someone like these guys at your place that can constantly adapt your menu and match wine, that's great. But I think, once again, I keep going back to staff, but I think just reinforcing in the people that are working there every day about the basic food matching, having them tasting your food on the menu constantly and thinking and engaging in different wines that will match those products is everything, and talking to customers. If they're ordering food, about what wine will go with that, or they're ordering wine, what food will go with that. I don't think you can run a restaurant or a pub without that, to be honest. So it's fundamental.
I think Riz keeps coming back to a very important point, which is staff. So let's talk about staff a little bit. What's the best way to train staff? Aside from knowledge, actually to help decrease staff turnover. And Peter, I think you do quite a bit of training, so maybe start with you.
Well, obviously, it's pay me. Seriously, I think as an industry we're slightly too focused on product knowledge. I think it's important, but I do it, as Junior said, I do a lot of staff training, and I do some quite formal stuff and some relatively informal stuff. And I think the most important thing is encouraging people to understand that they have a palate and that their opinion is valid. Just because I tell them a wine is great doesn't mean it's great. If they don't like it, my response is always, what is it you don't like about this wine? Because that's the important thing. You don't want to say to your customers, oh, that wine's terrible, but you can say, that's not really my style of wine because I find it too dry. And I think lots of young restaurant staff find it quite liberating to be told that their opinion's valid. And I think once you can instill that confidence in that they have an opinion, they have a palate, their opinion is valid, then they become much more confident about making recommendations. And as Riz says, I think they have to taste food and wine together. I think that's really important. And I think it's super important in terms of staff retention. If people feel valued, I think the kind of restaurants that spend resource on staff training definitely have much lower staff turnover. In this industry, in the restaurant industry, I think people say, oh, well, if I train these people, they might leave, they might go and get a better job. And I just think that's wrong. I think if your human resources are terrible, maybe that's the case. But I think if you treat your staff properly, and for me, helping to develop staff as part of treating them properly, then they are much more likely to stay. And the WACT has numbers that suggest that training is also extremely good, quite directly to the bottom line. It actually makes your staff more profitable. So I think it's maybe a combination of formal training and tasting, but I think very, very regular, small tasting sessions, wine and food together. I think maybe once a week, more often if you can swing it. And not huge set pieces, maybe a 5-10 minute session on a regular basis combined with something more formal. I think it's a really good combination.
Obviously, drinking wine is very important, for your staff to not just know about the particular wine, but develop a passion. You know, we work in an industry, unlike in America where we don't get tips, so it's not seen as a career. Fundamentally, hospitality is seen as a stepping stone, so you need to engage your staff into finding something which they enjoy and have a passion for, which they can carry on. And wine knowledge and food knowledge or cocktail knowledge is one of those things, so you need to really harness that. I mean, we're lucky, we have good supplier as amongst co-vintners. We go on wine trips 3 or 4 times a year. We go and visit vineyards, speak to the winemaker, get a sense of the tale. I really understand the stories behind wines. We're constantly drinking wine and eating food. And just, I think, like you said, I think, you know, I don't think it's important to know sugar levels in wine or the pH levels. I think what's important is to know the real story behind it and whether you like it or not. Wine's a simple product. We're the people that make it complicated because it makes our jobs sound more interesting than they really are. Yeah, it's a simple product, it's a juice, and once you translate that to your staff and give them confidence to talk about it, I think then they're going to sell it a lot more confidently.
Okay, next question is to Nicolas.
I think you got someone who want to ask a
Oh,
question.
There's a question there, go on. Is there a microphone or?
Given what Chris said about having a lot of casual staff, and what Pete said about sitting people down for an hour, when you sit your staff down at the beginning of that hour, how do you incentivize them to sit and listen and engage in that for the next hour? You know, you have a lot of staff who I think they've just been called in an hour early for a wine training.
Mm-hmm.
How do you communicate to them this is worth their time?
How to get them enthused to come to work an hour earlier, to sit there and to be engaged? That's the question.
I think actually, obviously in a restaurant or a bar, there are lots of things you can train people about, not just about wine. So I think if, as a business, you're training people properly and they understand from the word go that training is part of their job, that's one thing. And I think also doing it properly and doing it regularly. Now, I sit an hour, I would say sometimes, but I also think 10 minutes. You're right. To say to somebody, you've got to come in early for an hour, I have clients who pay their staff. I have other clients who just expect their staff to come in for that hour sometimes because that's what they want. I think it's great if you pay people, but I think it's also the quality of training that really matters. Like if it's really boring, you can't really expect them to like it. And I think you've got to mix it up. You've got to actively seek feedback from them as well. I did a session last week with a restaurant, and I completely changed what I've done with these people. I do it once a month for them, and I gave them 4 wines to taste blind. I said, I don't want you to think about what these wines are. What I want you to focus on is what they taste like. And they were mostly completely wrong about what the wines were, but it made them rethink what they were doing. So from my point of view, and we were talking about food and wine matching before they knew what the wines were. So for me, that was a really positive, and I think I got really positive feedback from that. They really found that valuable. So it's about mixing it up, I think.
That's very good. Nicolas, just 1 second. Nicolas, would you like to add anything to that?
No, I think we cover it all. I think for me, training or staff development is certainly one of the most difficult part of my job, but is as well the most valuable. And I think when you take someone, I'll give you an example as a sommelier, but as a commis sommelier, and you make them develop every single step, I think it's a massive achievement. And yes, sometimes you ask people to come 1 hour earlier, but if it's, I don't know, for training made or done by Peter McCombie, it's not every day that you are meeting Peter McCombie, so it's the same for a winemaker visiting us. Maybe not in the time, the work frame of ours, but it's as well a personal development, and I think that the staff need to consider it as well. So,
Reece, anything to add in terms of engaging the staff?
Yeah, I think Nicolas is right, and it's very, very difficult, as we know, staff retention in this country and getting people inspired is a difficult process. But I think the most important thing is your focus is not about product knowledge. Your focus is about making your staff passionate about that product. Then training ceases to be a chore, it becomes something they look forward to. If you engage in emotive response from your staff where they love wine, then wine training is something great. Yeah, it's a pleasure. It's something like, wow. I mean, I'm not saying that I pull it off, but I'd like to think in some of my places, my staff really look forward to wine training, probably because they want to get drunk. But other than that, they look forward to learning about it. Because, we're not talking about products in a way that would disengage them. Like any training has to be inspirational. What you're looking to do is to create an emotive response, you know, from your staff. And if you can do that, then knowledge just comes in easy to them. They soak it up.
Can I just add one thing to that? I actually think it's really good sometimes to open an expensive bottle of wine as well, and actually say to them, what do you prefer? Do you prefer the cheap one or the expensive one? And sometimes they prefer the cheaper one. But actually, I think people often appreciate the fact they're getting a chance to taste something that they would never buy. And maybe they really like it. So there's a possibility they might actually, A, they get a personal thrill out of it, but B, they might actually feel more confident about selling that wine on another occasion.
Okay. There's a question from the floor.
Is it? It is on.
Yeah.
So I've done staff trainings in two kinds of formats. Just when I've added something to the list, just doing a very quick briefing, having them taste the one wine and talk them through it. And I've also done them in larger formats where I've gone through maybe 6 or 7 at one time. And I find that the response from my staff is completely the same, which is just a blank look. So I'm wondering what is the right amount of staff training? What have you found is the number which is overwhelming, and what have you found is a key number to sort of zero in on so that they can keep their focus?
I'd say 8 is absolutely the maximum. I think if you do consumer tastings as well, 8's plenty. In fact, maybe even less than 8, maybe 6, but 8's definitely an absolute maximum for me. I think if you do that many, it's really good to compare and contrast. So maybe you say, we've got 2 serving rooms here, one is French, one is New Zealand. How are they different? Why are they different? What do they have in common? And so and I think getting people to feedback, you're always going to find some people aren't going to say much, that's for sure. But I think it's sort of identifying the people that are engaged and really working on them. I think the single tasting is just another way of doing it, of keeping it fresh, of not having a rigid format to say this is the way we do tasting. Maybe, if you've got a menu change and there's a new dish coming on the menu, maybe you prep it before you present it to staff, and you say, okay, we've got this new dish, give them a taste and say, what do you think on the wine this is going to work with us, and then pull a bottle out. I mean, you may well have an idea where you want to go with that, but I think it's that interactive approach that's really important. And I know sometimes it does feel like you're pushing water uphill, getting feedback, but I'd say try and keep it fresh, try and be a little bit innovative if you can, and hopefully you'll get there sooner or later.
Okay. Any more questions? We've got great knowledge in the panel in very diverse backgrounds, so the time to ask questions is now.
Hello. I loved what you were saying earlier about kind of liberating staff and making them feel that they actually have an opinion, which is quite an important thing for people to feel. How would you then transfer that into customers feeling like they also have a valid opinion aside from what a menu says?
I think one of the challenges in talking about wine is that whole thing. I think I would say for many customers, the wine ordering interaction is the scariest part of their night out. And if the person has a French accent and a nice suit on, they might actually find that more intimidating. And I know Nicolas and I know lots of great sommeliers, but when I talk to consumers, I always get bad stories about sommeliers, and it doesn't take very many to actually put people off. So I think there is that. I know sommeliers who actually have gone down on one knee to get eye level with people rather than standing over them. Now maybe that's a bit extreme. It may well have been Californian, but I think the language you use is really important, and again, it comes back to thinking about we're the enthusiasts, but I think you have to almost take a step back and say to people, what do you like? What do you normally drink? And try, and obviously you've got to figure out how much they want to spend, but you can't really say, how much do you want to spend? Even personally, I wouldn't mind being asked that, but I understand that actually for a lot of people that might be a bit intimidating. So I think it's that, again, maybe it's training, helping your staff to think about those questions, not to think about what they like, but to think about to find out what the customer likes. And I'm also a huge believer that you should never tell the customer their choice is wrong. So if somebody orders a wine with any kind of confidence, you bring it to them. Now, if you know that customer, maybe if they've been on a regular basis and they always order the Sancerre, maybe at some point you can say, do you want to try something else? You always order Sancerre, but I don't think it's up to us to try and tell them that they've made a mistake in ordering. I think that's it's really easy to do because you think you know better than they do, but they're the one paying. And so I think there's an element of humility about it that we have to remember, that we are trying to give them a good experience and we are trying to make them happy. I think, I'll stop there actually, I could go on for hours.
I think it's important that we talked about staff and now we speak about the consumer. As Peter said, ultimately they are the ones paying the bill. And Peter mentioned something earlier, right at the beginning. He said the consumer can trade up given the right incentives. So I'm going to ask the three members of the panel on their opinion, to share what incentive, what works, how can we engage the consumer? Reese.
Well, obviously the most important incentive is your customer feeling that he's making his choice. You know, as soon as your customer feels comfortable, he'll trade up. And, you know, that's our job. Our job is to guide them through a list to order more expensive or more interesting wines. You know, I think your question was, how do you make the customer feel engaged? Well, everything we're talking about. You know, by not alienating your customer through a complicated list, through having a stuffy pitch, you're going to make your customer feel not involved in the choice. And he's just going to feel awkward. You know, so everything we're talking about, having friendly staff, having an accessible list, pitching it at the right level, your aim is to make the customer be involved in that. And I think by doing that, you trade up straight away.
I'll leave it to Peter, then I'll come back.
A couple of things about pricing. One is I think it's, particularly maybe if the list is starting to get a bit bigger or maybe with the top end wines, but it's worthwhile sometimes. Nicolas talked about taking a lower GP percentage towards the top end of the list, which I absolutely agree. But I think you can deliberately pick out a wine and just really take a hit on margin. I have a friend who's a banker who's very generous, and I do a lot of eating and drinking with him. And does he know the price of things. We were in a Michelin-starred restaurant, actually 3 Michelin stars in France once, and he said, look, Pichon Lalonde 85, it's only €360. And my heart beat faster because I thought we were splitting the bill, but happily we weren't. Anyway, he knew that was way more than €360 on any restaurant wine list he'd seen in the last 12 months. We had it because for him it was a bargain. I think that's one really smart thing you can do. Now, obviously not everyone's at that price level. I think the other thing about GP is, and this comes back to what Riz said about experience. Ronan Sayburn, who's a fantastic sommelier, known to some of you, I think, when he was at the greenhouse, at one point, he did Chateau d'Yquem by the glass at a GP of 7%. I think the accountants hated him, but his view was he wanted to leave people with a fantastic memory. So they made a nice little cash margin on these glasses, but the customer actually, many customers, even at 2 Michelin-starred restaurants, many of his customers would never have tasted Yquem. So here he was saying I want to give you a treat. Okay, I'm going to take a hit on GP, but I'm going to leave you with this fantastic experience. And I just thought that was incredibly clever.
That's a brilliant idea.
Agreed.
Riz.
Yeah, I mean, on that note, apart from house wine and the first 2 I sell by the glass, I'm not really bothered about GP. I'll sell wine for the right price. You know, there's certain wines that if I was concerned about GP, no one would order them. You know, so I sell a wine which I know at a price it's going to sell. There's a great example of that. There's a restaurant in London, and a guy used to work in the wine industry. It's called 10 Greek Street. 10 Greek Street, he doesn't care about GPs. He'll sell wine cheaper than anywhere else, but he also has a black book. You know, in his little black book where he daily updates wines from Liberty's fine wine list, crosses them out as they come in. He sells wines that, you know, he'll sell a wine that will cost in any other restaurant £300, he'll sell it for £100. All good vintages as well, so they're all drinking well. That black book, you have to be in the know. You come in that restaurant, you ask Luke for a black book, he hands you that black book, and it's his little private stash. His private stash, straight away the customer feels privileged and feels exclusive. He buys into it because I feel like I know about wine. I'm going in, I've got the little black book. and straight away I'm trading up because every wine on that list ranges from 70 to 200 pound. But he's managed to appeal to me in a way that I feel that I'm making that choice. Well, really, he's just guiding me to that upsell. And I think it's another clever way of selling wine and an intelligent way of selling wine. But I think fundamentally the days of saying, right, I'm making 70% on my glass wines, 60% on my carafes and 55%, they're done. You sell wine at the price it sells. And I think that's a fundamentally very important way to reach your customer.
So we had the black book, we had the lower GP. Nicolas, any more tricks that we can use to engage the consumer?
Well, you know, I'm a believer as well on the journey of the customer at the table, and trade up. You can convince someone who want to spend 80 pounds to buy a bottle at 100 maybe, but I think that where you will trade up, it's as well. Let him have that bottle at 80 pounds if it's an interesting bottle, but you know, don't miss on the aperitif. Don't miss maybe with a glass of white wine, with a starter. Do not remind your guests that, a Madeira is superb with cheese or a port. Remind them that you've got a super selection of sweet wine and perhaps you've got decant by the glass as well. And, you know, it's just a reminder, but it's a way as well of trade-up. And remind them that you've got a bar after them dinner, that we are more than welcome to that they are more than welcome to visit it and to have a digestive, liquor, spirits, or after dinner cocktail. That's as well a way of trading up. That's the real journey of an experience, basically.
I think that's a really good point as well, because it's not about a hard sell; it's about offering.
Yeah, exactly.
So I'm always amazed if I'm seated, taken, shown to a table, sat down, and the hostess, waiter, whatever, walks away without offering me a drink. I just think you're nuts. I'm here to eat and drink. Why aren't you offering me a drink, or at least a wine list? And I think it's that, you're right. It's that, you know, if three people around the table have still got some red wine, they're having cheese, and there's one person empty glass, maybe you say, can I get you a glass of something? It's simple as that, and it's not pushy. You know, customers are out to eat and drink, so if we're not offering them things, it's harder for them to buy. But I don't like a hard sell. I think there's a real difference between offering and hard selling, and I think that you're talking about offering.
Yeah,
very good. Another question from the floor?
Hello. I'm opening I guess it's more of a kind of canteen bar in Clapton in Hackney, and it's very small, and I guess we've not opened yet, but I kind of understand that our customers, you know, on one side are looking for something a bit more exciting in their wine list. There's a pretty bad choice in Clapton, as it's, you know, recently become quite, you know, trendy. So one of the kind of problems I have, like, we've tasted some amazing wines, is that I know a lot of my friends will scan the list and look for, you know, the classic Shiraz, whatever. So one of the things we were thinking about was doing, and they will go by price by that, you know, by that point. But one of the things we were thinking about was doing maybe a day a week, maybe even a Monday when we know we're going to be slow, where every bottle is a set price. So you know what you were saying about allowing your staff to try the expensive stuff. But so one of my, you know, I think it's a good idea to kind of get people talking about it and trying things they wouldn't normally try. But at the same time, I'm worried that they'll think, well, hold on a second, if you could sell it to me on this day for 15, why are you selling it to me later on in the week for, do you mean?
I think what you do is it's how you sell. I think it's a great idea. What you do is you say, look, we want you to try some wines. We want to give you a treat, an affordable treat. So I think that's the way you sell it. Yeah. I have with one of my clients, we have a wine of the month thing where we take a hit on margin, usually with support of a supplier. Yeah. But the view is the wine should be sellable at the real price, if you like. But we're trying to get people to trade up. So if they'll try it because it's under £50, but it should go back on the list at 75 or 80 or something like that. And we hope that we get enough traction because they've had a chance to try it. So that's fundamentally behind that. I think that's a great idea. Okay.
Can I ask one more question as well?
Go on.
Okay, so like I was saying, people are going to scan the list and look for the kind of cab sav or whatever. And in that one line that we kind of describe it in, it's really difficult because, like, I know a lot of my friends are kind of like, you know, the Prosecco girls, and then there's another lot that customers who will have, which probably know people that own vineyards. So in that one like line, is it acceptable to say kind of like taste like a better Cab Sav, you know, something else?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I mean, my most cynical tasting note on a wine list once was I had a Nocciola from Trentino, which no one's ever heard of and no one was going to drink. We put it on by the glass and I just put, is this the new Pinot Grigio?
Yeah.
And boy, did it sell. And then when we took it off by the glass, it continued to sell because people had had the license to try it, if you like, and it was quite nice. Now, it's not the same as Pinot Grigio, but that was enough to get people over that hurdle.
Yeah, definitely.
So you can be a bit cynical.
That was one of my questions. Why do people buy Pinot Grigio, and what can we replace it with?
Oh, can I answer? I feel really strongly about this. I think in this business we're a little bit too quick to have contempt for customers who drink Pinot Grigio. And I think what we should say is why people buy it, and they buy it for several reasons. One, because they can pronounce it. Two, because they think it's Italian, whether or not it is. It might, it could be Hungarian, could be Australian, but in principle they think it's Italian. Secondly, it doesn't taste as much. Now that's a positive choice. So I would say the cliche would be more women drink Pinot Grigio than men. I would say maybe men are more prone to talking nonsense about wine than women. Who knows? But I think lots of people who drink Pinot Grigio are not wanting to talk about the wine. They want a glass of wine and to have a drink with their mates. And I think we should not look down our noses at people making those kind of choices. Of course, we might want to sell them something more interesting. My response is we should try and give them the best Pinot Grigio that we can afford, that's not stupidly expensive, but make them trade up a little bit and then offer them value with the obscure wine. So you can give them, if they want something that's lightly fruity, more or less dry, not particularly complicated, maybe you can give them, Bianca di Costosa. And because they don't know what it is, it should be better value. And the Pinot Grigio, you find them a slightly better one, make them pay a bit more. So there's a clear margin of difference. People who want the Pinot Grigio can still have it and be happy, and we're not saying you're an idiot. And people who want the more affordable glass of dry white wine, it's there as well.
Good. And you can still make more profits.
Yes.
There's a question from the floor.
What would you say is the best way to get people who would maybe still have a beer and things like that with their meal to kind of start to move on to wine? Because we've got a lot of customers that will obviously know about wine and kind of know what they want, but what do you do to people who literally are starting at a waypoint that they kind of have a very minimal knowledge and wouldn't really choose wine with their meal? Mm-hmm. Like, what's the best way to kind of get...
How to introduce people from beer into wine, basically.
Pinot Grigio. to be, in a nutshell, you need wine that's accessible first and foremost. And here we are talking about the ills of selling Pinot Grigio, but that's the exact reason. Because people drink Pinot Grigio because it's easy. It's drinkable. That's why they drink it. And when you first start drinking wine, you want something that's easy and drinkable. And as you develop a love for wine, your palate changes and your confidence changes, and you can embark on a journey, as it were. But, keep it simple, first of all, I think.
I'm just going to add to that. I'm not going to disagree with Reese, but if you introduce the consumer the first Pinot Grigio, it has to be a good one. Otherwise, it will revert to beer. It will never go back to wine again.
The other thing is, maybe it's okay if they do drink beer. Maybe give people a little bit more choice of beer. Garrett Oliver, who's the best-selling author on beer, claims that beer is more versatile, matched with food than wine. Now, I'm not sure I agree with him, but maybe there's room, on your list to actually offer a little bit more diversity. And because I think, again, for lots of men, lager's a default, and lager may be the kind of beer equivalent of Pinot Grigio. It's uncontroversial. So maybe, you have something a bit more bitter, something a bit darker, something a bit more funky, hoppy, whatever. So that might be a way of engaging with those consumers. And maybe if they start thinking about the diversity of beer, then they might actually be a bit more open to looking at wine later down the track.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Any other questions? I've got a couple more. Nicolas, Just let's talk a little bit about trends. Do you see anything in terms of are customers asking for low alcohol wines or reduced alcohol wines or organic or biodynamic? Are there any trends that we should be aware of? We read a lot in the news, in magazines and stuff, but it's actually happening in the restaurants.
No, it is happening, and I think it's general to the world of wine actually. Low alcohol, yes, but you can still have a higher alcohol level. I think what is more and more in demand it's elegance and balance basically. So for first of all the sake of gastronomy, you are in a restaurant, you want to drink several glasses of wine rather than one or rather than only one bottle. So there is a demand, and you tend to see more and more elegant style of wine, mostly red wine actually, in demand. Biodynamic, organic, it is as well fashion, it is a trend, it is in demand. I would say maybe a bit less than 2 years ago. I think it started to decrease a bit, but it's we need to have some. We need to propose some because there is demand and there is interest as well. Biodynamic or natural movement. When it started 10 years ago, brings something very, very different to the wine world, and I think it was the right time. No, you cannot avoid it anyway.
Is there a question of you guys educating consumers and offering,
course, yeah.
or they're sitting down and said, I would like to taste a biodynamic wine?
Well, some of them are like that, yeah, and you need to be very careful because you need to let them know what to expect in the bottle. Otherwise, the supplier will not be very happy with the return. But no, as long as you know your product, you know what you recommend, you make your guests aware of what to expect. If they have a bit of curiosity or sometime if they are courageous, yes, you can open it. Yeah.
Same thing for you, Rhys? Do you notice any trend for low alcohol or anything else, or just fruit-forward, easy drinking wines?
I think the trend is that it's a really interesting time to be in our industry because people are enjoying and drinking wine like never before. I think wine is becoming a drink of choice for a lot of people, and they're trying things, obscure grapes that would never happen. So I think that's a trend that I think in essence that we're talking about is us matching our pitch towards that trend and maximizing that trend. That people want to know about wine, people want to drink wine. Before I think it was a product that was maybe seen as quite exclusive. I don't think that's the case anymore. And for me, that's the trend. Yeah.
I'd agree with both. I think on the one hand, I think wine is becoming more of an accessible beverage, and there are plenty of people looking for upfront fruity wines, but I think actually also there are people looking for more finesse and more balance. Just one point on biodynamics, I would say though, for me, often that's more about the backstory. It's a bit like Riz was saying before, we don't really want to tell people too much technical stuff. Who cares about malolactic fermentation? Now, I'm interested because I can be a geek when it comes to wine. And I think almost with biodynamics, you need to be a bit careful that you don't oversell that side of it. It's like, personally, I don't care if a wine's organic or not, if it tastes bad. Like, if it tastes good, the fact that it's organic is interesting, and actually from an ethical point of view, I'm very happy. But I'm not interested in an organic wine if it doesn't taste any good. I'm not interested in a biodynamic wine if it doesn't taste any good. So I think for me that those are things that we share with people who show, as Nicolas said, sometimes people are interested. So maybe we do talk about it. But I think maybe that crosses over into the area of authenticity. Maybe I think there are people who are wanting to know that a wine has a kind of authenticity, that it comes from a particular place, and so then you sort of get an overlap between technical knowledge and backstories and the stories that turn people on.
Okay, we're almost there. I just have one last question, and the question goes for the three of them. And I think we all have pretty long careers in the industry, and I would like to know, what is the best advice ever given to you? Peter?
It was easy. Why don't you go to London and do your Master of Wine exam? Easy.
Nicolas?
I receive many advice actually. You know,
What's the best one, or a couple of the best ones that maybe we can apply to our own businesses?
Best one, maybe if you're scared, close your eyes. And I think that was it. Yeah.
Okay.
My mum told me to settle down. It's probably the best advice I've ever had. In terms of wine, just enjoy it, I think. You know, just enjoy wine. Don't complicate it. I think that's the most important thing you can bring in terms of your approach to it.
Actually, can I just share one more? Actually, in an earlier life, I was in sales, and I was out doing some staff training in a restaurant with a very larger-than-life Australian winemaker. And he stood up in front of these restaurant staff with a bottle, and he said, "Let's not mess around." And he didn't say mess, he said something else. "This is £5 worth of fun." And I thought that's the best thing I've ever heard anybody say about wine. Because they all laughed, but they remembered him, and they remembered that actually pleasure is at the heart of wine. If it doesn't taste good, why are we talking about it? I always remember that. I've repeated that so many times. Good. £5 worth of fun.
Excellent. So, guys, thank you very much for your attention. I hope you enjoy. I hope you learn something that you can apply in your own businesses. Thank you very much, Nicolas. Thanks very much, Peter. Thank you very much, Reese. I hope you enjoyed the day. There's some amazing wines out there. So please go and have lots of fun.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Very good.
Thank you.